The first TMNT live-action film had been a groundbreaking box office success, unleashing turtle mania onto the world and making 1990 the year of the turtle. But even before its release, a sequel was a no-brainer. Most of the research and development had already been done. By 1991, the sequel had the potential to reinvigorate turtle mania. But could it keep the franchise on top? Or was the turtles' popularity already fading? Today, I'm diving into the secret of the Ooze, from the original script to the movie we actually got. There were good reasons to rush a sequel into production. Playmates understood that successful action figure lines typically lasted 3 years at most. This theory had been a driving force behind Mirage's decision to bring the Turtles to the big screen during the toy line's 3rd year. Even before the movie's release, the producers had already planned to take advantage of the research and development from the first film. This meant a sequel was viable, and releasing it within a year could help maintain the franchise's momentum. But by the Christmas season, the toy line had finally peaked in sales. So realistically, there was no other way but down. Still, stranger things had happened in this franchise before. The Turtles creators, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, had approval rights, so they began pitching ideas for the sequel weeks before the first movie's release. Their goal was clear: to keep the movies as adaptations of the comics and avoid drifting into cartoon territory. The plan was to only hint at the Shredder's survival, setting up his return for a 3rd film. Looking for a different villain, they pitched a story based on the early issues of the comics, introducing Baxter Stockman and his Mousers. Taking advantage of the rat-related themes, they also considered including the Rat King in a more faithful adaptation of his comic book counterpart. But another idea seemed to interest the producers more: an adaptation of the TCRI storyline, finally revealing the mystery behind the canister of ooze that mutated the Turtles. In this version, the Turtles would have infiltrated the TCRI building, met the Ootrams, and accidentally activated the Transmat device, bringing 3 Triceratons to Earth. The Turtles would then have helped the Ootrams return home while holding off the National Guard. This would have set up a 3rd movie based on Return to New York. For side characters, the creators pitched a love triangle between April, Casey, and Danny. Either April or Danny would have been captured by the Ootrams while investigating TCRI. If April had been the one placed in suspended animation, this would have given Casey a strong motive to help the Turtles break into TCRI. A later pitch connected the Mousers to TCRI, with Baxter Stockman reimagined as an Ootram. In this version, the Mousers were a cover-up, a way for the Ootrams to generate funding for their return home. Knowing that the studio was worried about parent backlash over the first movie's violence, the creators suggested a way to tone it down organically. The idea was for Master Splinter to teach the Turtles a lesson based on the pacifist warrior philosophy of the Shaolin monks of China, who advised, when confronted with aggression, one should avoid rather than check rather than hurt rather than maim, and maim rather than kill. In the movie, the Turtles would have shared this lesson with Casey. But no matter what they pitched, it became clear to Kevin and Peter that the studio was trying to fix what wasn't broken, pushing the film's tone closer to the cartoon. They wanted brighter colors and a more kid-friendly feel. It was also clear that Kevin and Peter's approval rights weren't as powerful as they had hoped. Just 2 weeks after the first movie's release, the producers began searching for a director with comedy experience, a successful sequel on their resume, and the ability to work under pressure. This led them to Michael Pressman. One of the producers, Terry Morris, had already worked with him, and that connection was all it took to bring Pressman into the conversation. However, Terry wasn't the reason Michael took the job. What actually tipped the scale was a young actor Pressman had worked with on Joshua's Heart. The actor was a huge TMNT fan and told him everything there was to know about the characters. Shortly after that conversation, Terry called Michael. Having already learned so much about the Turtles, Michael felt like he couldn't turn down the offer. Michael then watched the first film and was immediately hooked. However, he had strong opinions about its tone. He felt it didn't need to be so dark or so violent, so he was set on making the sequel brighter and more lighthearted. His vision for the Turtles wasn't far off from what Bobby Herbick, the original writer of the first film, had in mind. He wanted the Turtles to feel like the Marx Brothers for 5-year-olds, or Blazing Saddles for kids. He hoped that while the movie leaned into slapstick comedy, adults would still find it entertaining. After all, comedy was universal, and parents might connect with the film's surreal humor. On the writing side, Todd W. Langen returned, this time as the sole writer. Todd had been hired for the first movie because he was fast and affordable, completing the script in just 10 days. This time, he had more than 10 days. He started working on the script in the spring and finished it by September 1990, only returning later to make modifications when production issues arose. Like Bobby before him, Todd, Tom Gray, and David Chan met with the Turtles creators to discuss potential storylines. Based on these conversations, Todd wrote a story treatment that Kevin and Peter had to approve before he could begin writing the screenplay. Todd viewed the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as a comedy at its core, so he leaned into humor for the sequel. However, he disagreed with the push to tone down the violence. He saw the action in the first movie as cartoon-like and believed kids were smart enough to recognize that. After all, he had grown up watching Looney Tunes, and it had never crossed his mind to drop an anvil on someone's head. Still, Todd and Michael continued fine-tuning the script. Since the Ooze played such a central role, they toyed with giving the sequel an environmental message. Despite their enthusiasm, they soon realized that the theme felt forced and that all the preachy elements were dragging the story down. In the end, the Ooze remained just a plot device. Losing the environmental theme was fine for Michael, whose main priority was to make the movie purely entertaining. However, he still had hopes that if the film performed well enough, the Turtles could continue being placed in stories that tackled deeper themes, like prejudice, social issues, and ecology. That is, as long as he was brought back for the third movie, something he wasn't contractually obligated to do. One of the earliest script changes involved the company behind the Ooze. It was initially going to be called TCRI, just like in the comics, but after discovering that a real TCRI labs existed in California, they renamed it TGRI. Regardless of the creative choices, making a movie with visual and practical effects, animatronics, martial arts action scenes, and audio dubbing in post-production was a massive challenge for everyone involved. The production schedule was brutal. It took 3 months to write the script, 4 months of pre-production in total, 53 days of filming, and 3 months of post-production, including dubbing. The pressure was on until the very end. Despite working 6 days a week, this was a big opportunity for Michael Pressman, who had spent the previous 7 years directing only TV movies. The cast didn't stay the same for the sequel. Ken Scott was initially the fellow Chucker in the first movie, but after Raphael's stuntman got injured, he stepped in as Raphael's stunt double. Since Josh Pais, Raphael's in-suit and voice actor, didn't return for the sequel, Ken took his place inside the suit. Behind the secret of the Ooze was a new character, Professor Jordon Perry, played by David Warner. Naming this character was surprisingly frustrating. They had to change it multiple times because they kept finding real people in the New York City phone book with the same name. Todd eventually settled on the name by combining two of his co-workers from the Wonder Years, Mark Perry and Jill Gordon. The unusual name has confused people over the years, often leading to him being called Jordon Perry, even on official merchandise. As for David Warner, whose performance in Time Bandits inspired the character of Savanti Romero, he took on the role in The Secret of the Ooze to impress his daughter, who was a huge Turtles fan. David McCarran returned as the voice of the Shredder, but James Saito, the on-camera actor for the first film, did not return for unknown reasons. Taking his place was Francois Chow, who wasn't even told that his performance would be dubbed. He only found out halfway through production. But Shredder had more than one actor in this movie. Professional wrestler Kevin Nash stepped in as the Super Shredder for the final fight scene. Rounding out the villains were two new additions, Toka and Razar. According to Todd Langen, the two characters weren't in his original script. They were added later to give the Turtles mutant villains to fight. It was a clear sign that the Ooze could also be used for evil. The producers originally wanted Bebop and Rocksteady, but for ownership reasons, Kevin and Peter pushed for original mutants instead. There's even more to the story behind their creation, which I've already covered in another video. Todd tried naming the characters Biter and Snarl, but the creative duo managed to get away with their own names. Ernie Reyes Jr. was a stunt double for Donatello in the first film, a role he got after the original stunt performer got injured. Before the movie's release, the producers reached out to him and told him they were considering giving him a character in a potential sequel. At 19 years old, Ernie couldn't believe his luck when he realized he had landed a major role as Keno, the teenage pizza delivery guy with martial arts skills. Since fight choreography was his specialty, Ernie choreographed all of his fights, including the opening scene. With Keno, Jordon Perry, and Toka and Razar added to the film, there simply wasn't enough room for Casey Jones. The character was completely dropped without even a mention. Michael Pressman, who had worked with Elias Koteas before, wished he could have kept Casey in, but the cast was already overcrowded. Finally, there was the strange case of April O'Neil. The producers initially claimed they recast Judith Hoag because she didn't test well with focus groups. But the truth was a little more complicated. During negotiations for the sequel, Judith pushed for better working conditions on set, especially for the non-union stunt performers. She also asked for a raise and wanted the story to have more depth, arguing that kids deserved a strong plot alongside the action. These demands, combined with the negative focus group feedback, were enough for Golden Harvest to replace her. Interestingly, they did approach her again for the third movie. Taking over as April was Paige Turco, a daytime actress whose agent submitted her for the role without telling her. There were 100 actresses auditioning. Paige made it to the final 30, and after the last 4 candidates underwent screen tests, she landed the part. Producers thought she had a warmer energy that kids would respond to. This was a huge challenge for Paige. Secret of the Ooze was her first feature film. To prepare, she avoided watching Judith's performance, the cartoon, or reading the comics. Instead, she shadowed a friend who worked as a real-life field reporter for 2 days. She spent time in the newsroom and on location, getting a feel for how her version of April should behave. On the technical side, most of the development and research had already been done for the first movie. Unfortunately, Jim Henson passed away just 2 weeks before production began. His son, Brian Henson, didn't return for the sequel either, as he was already busy with another project. He was also disappointed that Steve Barron had been removed from the director's chair. In any case, Jim Henson's Creature Shop worked hard to make life on set more bearable for the actors. Generally speaking, the process remained the same. Actors wore suits equipped with radio-controlled electronics, allowing a puppeteer to control their mouth, lips, eyes, eyebrows, and eyelids. The upgraded suits gave actors the ability to remove their helmets since the servos no longer needed long wires running down their necks. With most of the electronics relocated to the head, the suits were also 15 pounds lighter. The helmets now included internal air conditioning, helping performers withstand the extreme working conditions. On the flip side, moving all the servos into the helmet made the heads noisier, another reason why all the voices had to be dubbed in post-production. As in the first movie, both the actor inside the suit and the puppeteer delivered their lines simultaneously, creating a surreal experience for everyone on set. The turtles' faces were also redesigned. According to Michael Pressman, this was done to better match the sequel's more comedic tone and make the turtles more appealing to younger kids. The movie was filmed almost entirely at the Coralco Studios in Wilmington, North Carolina, with only a few scenes shot on location in New York. Production design was handled by Roy Forge Smith. One of his biggest contributions to the film was the debut of the Subway Den, which was based on the real-life abandoned City Hall station in New York. The set was later reused for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 and the Next Mutation TV show. The in-world name for this fictional station was Dodaman. Just like in the first movie, there were plenty of cameos. Here are some of the most interesting ones. Michelin Sisti, the in-suit actor for Michelangelo, played April's neighbor. His fictional wife, played by comedy actress Susie Essman, also happened to be Michael Pressman's cousin. Leif Tilden, the in-suit actor for Donatello, played one of the Foot Clan members in the scene where Shredder returned. Mark Cosso, the in-suit actor for Leonardo, appeared as one of the newsroom staff members. In that same scene, Michael Pressman played the manager. Sasha and David Pressman, Michael's parents, played the old couple who refused to share their cab with Toka and Razar. Michael J. White, a famous martial artist and actor who would later play Spawn on the big screen, had an uncredited role as one of the Foot recruits. Michael Pressman's wife, his girlfriend at the time, was the uncredited dancer who was taken hostage by the Shredder at the club. And while I can't confirm this, I'm pretty sure several crew members acted as extras in the club scene. The movie had a budget of $25 million, significantly more than the first film. This time, most of the money didn't need to go to the creature shop. With the success of the first movie's soundtrack, the producers decided to invest more into the album. At the time of pre-production, Vanilla Ice's Ice Ice Baby had just become the first hip-hop single to top the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Rob Van Winkle, the singer, also happened to be a huge fan of the franchise, so he eagerly accepted the offer to appear on screen with his favorite characters. Unfortunately, Ninja Rap didn't even chart and only had moderate success at the time. Despite this, the song gained popularity over the years, thanks to nostalgia. Another song in the soundtrack was Dan Hartman's That's Your Consciousness, co-written with Charlie Midnight and John DePrez. You might recognize this song, as an instrumental version was used during the opening scene. Other artists featured on the soundtrack included Ya Kid K, Kathy Dennis, David Morales, Spunkadelic, and more. The movie also featured a musical score by John DePrez and his orchestra on the half shell. Interestingly, many songs in the soundtrack ended up having ecological themes. The Secret of the Ooze opens with the introduction of Kino, a martial artist and pizza delivery guy who stumbles upon a robbery in progress outside April's new apartment. Overpowered, he's quickly outmatched, until the Turtles, who are wondering where their pizza had gone, step in to help. They take down the criminals and send Kino to call law enforcement, and by the time he returns, the crooks are all tied up, and the pizza is paid for. With their old lair compromised, the Turtles and Splinter temporarily moved in with April while searching for a new home. However, the Turtles were growing too comfortable living on the surface, something that concerned Master Splinter. He reminded them that their place wasn't above ground, and warned them not to forget who they really were. The Turtles were right to be cautious. Not all the Foot Clan members had been arrested, and in Shredder's absence, Tatsu took charge. His leadership, however, didn't last long. The Shredder had survived his near-fatal encounter with the garbage truck and was now back, heavily injured, disfigured, and out for revenge. Knowing of the Turtles' connection to April, Shredder sent Freddy, a Foot Clan member, to spy on her by getting an internship at Channel 3. Freddy accompanied April to New Jersey, where she interviewed Professor Jordon Perry of TGRI. The company had decided to make public their cleanup efforts, unearthing toxic waste canisters from the area and taking advantage of technological advancements on toxic waste disposal. But as the interview was taking place, two TGRI workers uncovered something unusual: giant dandelions, a clear sign that one more canister remained buried in the area. Freddy found one of these dandelions and, realizing what it meant, brought it straight to the shredder. Shredder immediately saw the potential of this substance, realizing it could help level the playing field against the turtles. He sent Tatsu to retrieve the last canister. April returned home that night to discover that Splinter had watched her interview on TV. He gathered the turtles and finally revealed the truth. TGRI was the company behind the mysterious ooze that mutated them. But while this was a unique opportunity to discover the truth behind their existence, Splinter urged the turtles to find out whether this ooze was unique. If more of it existed, it could fall into the wrong hands, creating powerful, evil mutants who would threaten not just them, but the entire city. The turtles arrived too late to stop the Foot Clan from escaping with the ooze and the professor. Having confirmed the threat of the Foot Clan, the turtles had to make a decision on what to do next. Leo prioritized finding a new home, knowing that staying with April was too dangerous. On the other hand, Raph wanted to act immediately and hunt down the Foot Clan. Their argument was cut short by the sudden arrival of Kino, who, suspecting the turtles were living with April, delivered an unsolicited pizza as an excuse to investigate. He was right, and he quickly discovered the truth. But the sight of Splinter proved to be a bit too much, even for a New Yorker. After learning their story, Kino revealed that the Foot was recruiting teenagers again and offered to infiltrate them. Raph was all for it, but knowing how dangerous it was, Splinter forbade it. The turtles headed into the sewers to search for a new home. Still frustrated with their priorities, Raph broke off from the group. Not long after, the rest of the turtles accidentally stumbled upon their new lair, an abandoned subway station. At the junkyard, Shredder ordered Tatsu to find the most vicious animals he could for an experiment. Once found, Professor Jordon Perry was forced to mutate a snapping turtle and a wolf. These two creatures grew up to become Toka and Razar. Unfortunately, unlike the turtles, who had 15 years to develop their minds, these new mutants had the intelligence of a baby. Disappointed, Shredder ordered them to be disposed of, but the professor, feeling responsible, convinced him that their brute strength could still be useful. Meanwhile, Raph helped Kino infiltrate the Foot and finally found their new lair, the junkyard. There, he discovered the Shredder was still alive, but never got the chance to warn anyone. He and Kino were caught by Tatsu. Raph stayed behind to give Kino a chance to escape and warn the others.
You know, pal, if I had a face like yours, I'd try to make up for it with some sort of a personality.
Mikey, Leo, and Donnie rushed in to rescue Raph, only to fall into the trap. Of course, they expected this, and Splinter bailed them out. Realizing that his ninjas were no match for the turtles, Shredder unleashed Toka and Razar. The two mutants overpowered the turtles, forcing them to grab the professor and retreat through a sewer manhole. The Foot couldn't follow. Toka got stuck in it. Back at the lair, the professor finally explained the truth behind the ooze. It was just an unknown mixture of discarded chemicals that was accidentally exposed to a series of radiated waves. The scientists found out that this ooze had remarkable but dangerous mutagenic properties. 15 years ago, while transporting the substance for disposal, a near collision caused one of the canisters to fall into the sewer. That was how the turtles were created. The randomness of their origin deeply disappointed Donatello, who had always believed there was something special about their creation. Splinter reassured him, reminding him that his past wasn't as important as who he was in the present. Besides, with two powerful mutants on the loose, they had no time to dwell on it. The next day, while covering Toka and Razar's rampage, April realized Freddy was a member of the Foot. He sent her a message for the turtles. Meet them at a construction site that night, or the mutants would be unleashed on Central Park. It looked like the turtles were walking into an ambush, but the professor had a plan. He recruited the turtles to help create an anti-mutagen, one specific to the contaminated ooze he had used when trying to make Tokka and Rahzar less dangerous. They successfully came up with a formula, but now came the real challenge: finding a way to make the mutants eat it. The turtles arrived at the construction site with a pack of anti-mutagen donuts. They convinced Tokka and Rahzar to eat at least one. Unfortunately, the mutants figured out something fishy was going on, and a battle ensued. The fight moved into the Dockshore Club, where they interrupted a rapper's performance. The turtles quickly noticed that the two mutants were burping too much. According to the professor, this burping was slowing down the reaction to the anti-mutagen, and only carbon dioxide could accelerate it. After hearing this, the turtles took on fire extinguishers to put the mutants to sleep and demutate them faster. After the fight, the turtles had inspired the creation of the Ninja Rap, and thinking it was all part of the show, the crowd started cheering for them. But things took a dark turn when the Shredder showed up at the club with a canister of ooze, threatening to create more mutants with it. It was then that Keno, against Master Splinter's advice, decided to show up to help his friends, kicking the canister away from the Shredder and into the hands of the professor. But Shredder still had a small vial of the ooze. He took a dancer hostage and threatened to mutate her. Having mastered their environment, the turtles weaponized a speaker, blasting the Shredder out of the club and into the dock. The turtles thought that was the end of him. After all, he was never the same after his encounter with Splinter. But then, they were caught off guard by the return of the Shredder, now mutated into the monstrous Super Shredder, mutated clothes and armor included. The turtles tried to trap him under the dock's supports, but Super Shredder, blinded by rage, kept lashing out until he brought the entire structure down on himself. That was his end. The turtles, of course, escaped through the water and survived. The following day, TGRI disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a note from the professor thanking the turtles. The turtles returned home to an angered Master Splinter, holding the cover of the Daily News with a report about the birth of the Ninja Rap, urging the turtles to practice harder on the art of invisibility. On many occasions, Michael Pressman stated that the script was so short that there were no deleted scenes. But you know me, I had to go and take a look at the script, where I found a lot of things to discuss. The script I got my hands on was a final draft that included 2 revisions from August 1990. There must have been more revisions after this one that were used to adapt the movie into comics and novelization. Filming started in September, so the script must have been very close to the final product. Starting from the opening fighting scene, the script had an in-story justification for the turtles not using their weapons. Leo reminded his brothers about a lesson from Splinter about mastering their environment. This line shouldn't have been cut, because it had a call-out at the end in the dock scene and would have proved that the turtles were doing all of this to prepare for a situation like that. The scene itself was different. You can see exactly how while reading the adaptations. Donatello was the one weaponizing the yo-yo, and the salami chucks were at the beginning of the sequence, among other differences. My only complaint would be that they cut one of the best jokes in the script. The differences in the fight sequence were probably due to choreography changes and practical effect limitations. At least in this draft, the turtles gave Keno all the clues he needed to connect them to April. The final film made the clues more subtle, which still worked. The script also pointed out that April had just moved into her new apartment and was still unpacking. Regarding April's dialogue, it's clear that her lines were written with Judith Hoag in mind. She originally had a more passive-aggressive and clumsy personality, traits that Paige Turco completely transformed. Paige's version of April was so naturally warm that even her passive-aggressive comments came off as encouraging. Shredder's return from the garbage was, at least in this version, split into 2 scenes. This extended version included a few details that technically remained in the final film. Aside from his disfigurement and deeper voice, the script also stated that he could only use one hand. But which hand? I don't think they had decided. Throughout the movie, he mostly used his left hand. It feels like this injury was adjusted during filming, and it's most notable in the early scenes. A good example is the moment when Shredder says he failed against the Turtles. This was his reasoning for creating mutants, putting freak against freak. If you watch closely, he looks down at his right hand, which is almost off-screen. The presence of a cradling hand could be only one of the many injuries he received at the end of the first movie, and would explain why he avoided fighting until his mutation. The novelization didn't mention his hand injury, but the comic adaptation did depict him cradling his left hand. In the first TGRI scene, the dandelion Freddy found was initially meant to be in its seed head form. Instead of recognizing its scent, he simply blew on it. The novelization even described the dandelion as being the size of a volleyball, which aligns better with the seed head version. This change was likely made for practical reasons. According to this script revision, when Kino delivered the surprise pizza to April, he was originally going to say someone had ordered it for that address. In a later revision, this excuse was changed to blame someone in apartment 313 for not being home to receive it. Once inside, April would have hit herself while trying to play with the nunchucks, leading to Kino's "keep practicing" line. Comparing the script with the movie, this was the second instance where the final revision made Kino sound more socially abrasive. The other was at the beginning of the film, when he made his fat-shaming joke about the girls who rejected him. In the script version, and the adaptations based on it, the girls were already far away by the time he said it. It's unclear why these changes were made, but they do fit with Kino's hot-headed personality. The same guy who would storm off from a meditation session to go fight Shredder. Perhaps the biggest difference between the movie and the script is the newsroom scene. Michael Pressman admitted that it was added to pad out the film. However, there was a different scene in the script that may have been harder to film at the time. This scene would have taken place right after the Turtles and Splinter moved into the subway den. April would have visited them to bring news about TGRI. She had returned to New Jersey to check on them, and discovered that everyone was moving out. The disappearance of TGRI is still in the final film, casually mentioned by the professor at the den and by April at the end, but it's clear the script originally intended for it to be a bigger mystery. Paige Turco has said that while scenes may not have been fully deleted, things were definitely cut. You can see this missing scene play out in the comic adaptation. The missing scene also confirmed that Leo had followed through on his promise to track the Foot Clan after they settled in. Another small difference in the script is Kino's recruitment journey. These three scenes originally took place over 2 separate days. The junkyard scene was supposed to happen after Toka and Razar's introduction. While the final edit works fine with the scenes back to back, Kino has a complete change of clothes between the second and third scenes. Since the adaptations also split the recruitment in 2, this was likely an editing decision rather than a script change. Another element cut from the film, but present in the script and comic adaptation, is Shredder's throne. As far as I know, the prop never existed, but that didn't stop NECA from releasing their own take on it. The reason it's not in the movie is because it was part of a scene that was either never filmed or removed between revisions. This scene would have taken place after Kino's escape, showing the Foot setting up traps for the Turtles. It wasn't necessary to the plot, but traces of it survived. The novelization used lines from it, and the comic adaptation shows the full scene, concrete throne included. The throne itself reinforces the idea that Shredder was too weakened to fight. The fight against Toka and Razar in the junkyard was also shortened. While this was probably done for practical reasons, there may have been deleted takes since the Turtles' weapons appear and disappear inconsistently. The script made it clear that the Turtles were still mixing their weapons with trash from the environment. Another part that was potentially cut was an extended scene in the subway den while the professor was working on the anti-mutagen. The script made it clear that the substance couldn't demutate the Turtles since it was specifically tailored to Toka and Razar's contamination. This clarification is missing from the novel, but is present in the comic. The construction site fight was also longer and played out differently. Razar, being a wolf, would have sniffed out the cube before eating the donuts. This added extra pressure on the Turtles to find a way to force feed them. Working together, they eventually succeeded, giving them more than just 1 cube each. This was probably changed in a later revision, as the adaptation stayed closer to the final movie. The fire extinguishers also seem to have been a late addition. They appear in the comic adaptation, but the script revision I have, and the novelization, use seltzer water bottles instead. I prefer the fire extinguishers, though I can't imagine how either of these options would realistically reduce the creature's burping. The entire Dockside Club sequence, as it was originally named, would have gradually built up to the creation of the ninja rap. Sounds and shouts from the fight would have been recorded and mixed into the music. Lyrics about the battle would have been improvised, and the turtles would have eventually synchronized their fighting with the beat, turning it into a musical fight scene. The lead rapper in the script was a young woman named Jack. More about her in just a minute. Kino's interference in the final fight was originally meant to be fruitless, on purpose. Both he and Raph would have been distracted and knocked down by Shredder. This moment is still in the comic adaptation. This would have forced Shredder to grab a hostage, and in the script, that person was Jack, the singer. Instead of throwing Kino at Shredder like in the final movie, the Turtles would have signaled Kino to get her away from the speaker instead. After the Shredder was taken out, Kino and Jack would have checked on each other and ended up going out for pizza, hinting at a possible romance. The adaptations handle this differently. In the novel, it's Kino who gets taken hostage by Shredder. Since it's a book, the singer is never even mentioned. On the other hand, the comic stays closer to the script, while also including elements from the movie. Judging by the romantic subplot and the different lyrics for the ninja rap, it's clear that Vanilla Ice came into the process fairly late. Not too late though, since the comic does feature an unnamed male singer. One of the most speculated shots in the film is the one where the professor leaves with the last canister of ooze. In the script, it was clear that things had worked out well for him. This moment was meant to hint that there was more going on with TGRI. As he left, he would have given a final farewell with an enigmatic smile. According to Todd Langen, this was the second of 3 scenes leading to a big reveal. The first was in the subway den, where Donatello was disappointed by the randomness of their origin, and Splinter told him their search would have to wait. The third would have come after the club fight, when the professor, now alone in a janitor's closet, examined the canister of ooze, revealing that he was an Outram all along, possibly even Krang. This would have set up a third movie centered around the alien origins of the ooze. However, Kevin and Peter had already vetoed characters from the cartoon, and an Outram that looked like Krang but wasn't would have felt like the ultimate betrayal, especially for fans who were already expecting Bebop and Rocksteady. And let's be honest, an Outram wouldn't have looked kid-friendly at all. Michael Pressman stated that this scene was never in the screenplay and was likely cut very early in the process. Finally, there's the strange case of the Super Shredder. The script explained that his clothing and armor were torn and split apart as a result of his transformation, more like a Hulk-style mutation. So the film's version, where his armor inexplicably mutates with him, was clearly an artistic choice. It's also worth noting that Super Shredder made his debut in video games that same year, so there may have been some communication between the production and game developers to keep his look consistent. I already mentioned that the fight under the dock was the payoff to the Turtles' lesson about mastering their environment. Originally, it was much longer and more complex, but it was likely shortened due to budget and scheduling constraints. Back in reality, The Secret of the Ooze hit theaters on March 22nd, 1991, just under a year after the first movie. It stayed in theaters for 40 weeks. Box office-wise, the film made $78.6 million, opening with $20 million. Not bad for a movie with a $25 million budget. Unfortunately, it didn't match the performance of its predecessor. The first movie, with a $13.5 million budget, had opened with $25 million and went on to gross $135 million domestically and $202 million worldwide. At the time, some blamed the sequel for failing to capture the same magic, while others believed the franchise was losing steam. In hindsight, it was both. But the sequel had another advantage: merchandising. After the first movie's unprecedented success, the Turtles merchandise machine was ready to capitalize. Kids already had action figures, snacks, and apparel to fuel their turtle cravings. Playmates Toys famously didn't release any action figures for the first movie after considering it too dark, but that wasn't the case with the sequel. They launched Super Shredder, Toka, and Razar in 1991, followed by the Movie Star Turtles in 1992, likely riding the wave of the VHS release. The Movie Star line also included a Foot Soldier and Splinter. In 1993, the four Turtles got the giant figure treatment. Toka and Razar were added to the Mutatin wave that same year. Coinciding with the movie, there was also a plan to create a huge Subway Den playset, but it was deemed too expensive to produce and ended up being scrapped. The movie did very well in the secondary markets, with a VHS becoming one of the top-selling home videos in the 1991 holiday season. Music-wise, while remembered with nostalgia these days, the Ninja Rap wasn't as successful as Turtle Power, despite Vanilla Ice being at the peak of his popularity. According to Mirage staffer Paul Jenkins, filming Vanilla Ice's scenes was a nightmare for the crew. The rapper allegedly rode around the studio in a golf cart with two bouncers, at one point crashing into the Creature Shop's workspace, a major problem given the expensive nature of the animatronic suits. There are plenty of stories about his one-day involvement, but context is important. At 22 years old, he had just made history on the hip-hop charts and was dating Madonna. If the Dave Franco biopic about him ever gets made, we'll probably learn even more. Either way, it was a great experience for Rob. As for the Turtles creators, they were very disappointed with the quality of the film. They felt the producers were underestimating kids, dumbing things down so much that parents wouldn't be able to survive multiple viewings. To this day, it pains Peter Laird to see how the producers, director, and screenwriter couldn't see what made the first movie so successful. Perhaps the thing that pains people the most is that there were no lessons learned. Up until the release of the first movie, the TMNT franchise was being constantly underestimated by publishers and producers. But after the success of Turtlemania, you'd have thought that the people in charge of these adaptations would have started to see the potential in the source material instead of fixing what wasn't broken. In terms of contracts, things were about to change before the next installment of the franchise. Leif Tilden and Michelin Sisti couldn't return for the next film, as they were already busy working on the Dinosaurs TV show. Not that it would have mattered. Jim Henson's Creature Shop lost the contract for the turtle suits to a lower bidder. That was the end of Henson's involvement with the franchise. Ernie Reyes Jr. didn't return for the third movie, but he went on to work on many movies and TV shows, including the cult classic Surf Ninjas. Paige Turco was contracted to do another sequel, where she was hoping April would finally get to do some martial arts. Despite his Wonder Years success, Todd Langen abandoned the TV industry to write feature films. Perhaps disappointed by his experience with The Secret of the Ooze, he decided not to return to write the third movie. Todd was afraid that one of these movies would eventually flop and ruin his future opportunities. It's unclear what happened to Todd Langen. Secret of the Ooze remains his last credit on IMDb. Given how heavily his script was reshaped to be more marketing friendly, it's possible he simply had enough of Hollywood. That said, he still speaks about both films at conventions. So, with Turtlemania in decline, there was no longer a rush to release a film every year. 2 years would pass between 2 and 3, with Kevin and Peter hoping to bring the Turtles back to the tone of the first movie. They ultimately liked the third movie more than the second one, but that's a story for another day. So why is this movie considered so dumbed down? I don't think it's just the lack of ninja weapons or the goofy sound effects, it's that these changes felt pointless, considering violence was still happening. The movie's tone could also be seen as a downgrade from the first film. The lighting in particular made almost every scene feel like it was shot on a stage, something that wasn't as obvious in the previous movie. The Turtles themselves are more childish this time around. It's not impossible for teenagers to act sillier over time, but this story takes place immediately after the first movie. Production-wise, you can tell that they were filming on a very tight schedule, and as a result, some things simply couldn't materialize. You can tell this is the case when you read the suggested descriptions of the props in the script. One such case is the decontamination machine at TGRI. This prop appears in a sequence that felt too much like a low-budget TV show, clearly lacking the production values the first movie established. One thing that immediately stands out in this movie is the product placement. Even when it's not a specific brand, the way pizza is used throughout the film is enough to make you crave it. Then there's the random use of Bart Simpson, with no real reason for him to be there. This came straight from the script, making me think it was one of the many studio-mandated additions. Moving on to the movie's themes. According to Michael Pressman, the story was about friendship and loyalty, with the turtles' search for their origin as the central conflict. I can't really see his vision in the film. Perhaps it was at some point during pre-production, but the movie simply didn't have a strong theme like family did in the first film. Yes, the turtles want to figure out if there was more to their origin, but the plot was abandoned in favor of a shallow climax. Ultimately, the film is trying to say that one shouldn't look for their worth in the past, but in who one is now. This is perhaps why the secret of the Ooze was not revealed. It would have gone against that message. But then again, this theme applies only to the turtles. In the first film, the family theme also applied to the antagonists. I think you could stretch your thinking to say that the Shredder was letting his past cloud his mind, but the movie didn't want to explain his origin again. A different message became more prominent in the second part of the movie. The characters were no longer worried about where they came from, but where they belonged. This is a theme that was set up by Splinter early in the movie. Where do the turtles belong? Could they join the surface world, or were they destined to live in the anonymity of the sewers? Well, I'm not entirely sure what the conclusion of that theme was. They moved back underground, still, they influenced the creation of the ninja rap. Why should the turtles want to stay in the shadows anyway? This was a topic better explored in future films, even in the 2016 movie. In terms of original intentions, according to Todd Langen, Keno would have been April's neighbor with an attitude problem. The kind of guy who was always looking for a fight. While Keno is in a good chunk of the film, his character development ended up being a little choppy and, in the end, hard to follow. As for the botched environmentalist theme, I think they should have fully committed to it. It would have given the movie some real substance. That said, I do think removing the Utroms made sense. If aliens had been responsible for contaminating the environment, it would have taken accountability away from humans, which would have weakened the message anyway. However, according to Michael Pressman, the goal was never to have a message in the first place. His priority was to make the movie comfortably entertaining. By that measure, he succeeded, whether people, or critics, liked it or not. One thing's for sure, all this dumbing down wasn't a problem for dumb 9-year-old me. I loved this movie, and even though I can see now that it's not a masterpiece, it was good enough for me at the time. And because of that, I can still enjoy it today. Anyway, you have been listening to me talk about this movie for long enough. Now it is time to have fun. So, if you made it this far, leave a comment saying, "Go Ninja, go Ninja, go!" And also, leave your thoughts on this movie. Do you have nostalgia for it? Is this your favorite in the franchise? Let me know. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.